They laughed at me when I walked into the room like I didn't belong. Not all at once and not out loud. It was the quiet kind, the kind that lives in glances and smirks and the way a conversation stops just long enough for you to know you are the subject of it. I had learned to recognize that laughter by then. I had been hearing it in different rooms for most of my life. The look that said you are not quite enough for this space. The silence that followed my ideas in meetings like a door gently closing in my face. Carried all of it. I carried it in the way I sat slightly apart at company events. In the way I apologized before I spoke in rooms full of people who never apologized at all. In the way I wore invisible and called it practical. I was 24 when I left that company on a night I still remember clearly. The color of the carpet, the sound of the door, the cold air outside that felt like the only honest thing in the world. I walked away broken, certain they were right. Years later I walked back in. This time, not one person in that room could look me in the eye. My name is Olivia. I am 29 years old, and for most of those years I existed in the background of other people's narratives. I was the one who stayed late to finish work that received someone else's credit. The one who prepared thoroughly and was interrupted anyway. The one who smiled through comments about her clothes, her quietness, her way of doing things that was always slightly wrong by someone else's standard. I grew up in a small house with my mother and my younger brother, Marcus. Our mother worked long hours and we learned early to take care of each other. Marcus was 5 years younger and from the time he could talk he had an opinion on everything, which should have been annoying and never quite was. He was the kind of person who saw the good in things before the bad, not because he was naive, but because he had decided early that optimism was more useful. He believed in me with a consistency that sometimes embarrassed me. He used to say, in that way of his, that the world hadn't caught up to me yet. I used to smile and not believe him. He was right as it turned out. But it took 5 years and a gala invitation for me to understand it completely. I joined Hartwell & Associates when I was 23. It was a mid to large consultancy firm with a polished reputation, and a culture I understood within my first week was not designed for people like me. By that I mean people who had worked their way to the table without family connections or the particular confidence that comes from always being told your place in a room is deserved. The office sorted people quickly into those who belonged and those who were tolerated. I was placed firmly in the second category from the first day. My manager was a woman named Victoria. Sharp, well-dressed, and precise in a way that could have been admirable if it hadn't been weaponized. She had a talent for making you feel your shortcomings before you had quite identified them yourself. Her feedback was always professional enough on paper, but delivered with a tone that left a different message. She never said you are not good enough directly. She didn't need to. She said it in the way she redirected my contributions in meetings, in the small sigh before she read my reports, in the way she spoke about me to others just loud enough for me to catch the edge of it. I spent 10 months at that company trying harder and getting smaller. There was a group of colleagues who followed Victoria's lead the way people in offices often do. Not out of malice exactly, but out of the mundane desire to be on the right side of the room. 4 of them were consistent about it. Petra, who had been at the company longest and seemed to consider unkindness a form of seniority. Noelle, who laughed at everything Victoria found funny and never at anything else. Bridget, who masked cruelty as humor and called it being real. And Felix, who was mostly just present for it, which I came to understand was its own kind of participation. They had a name for me I heard secondhand through a colleague who felt guilty enough to mention it. The Ghost. Not because I was mysterious, but because I was barely visible. Unremarkable. Forgettable. The kind of person you pass in a corridor and don't quite register. I heard it and I nodded and I went home and sat with it for a long time. I had been called worse things by people closer to me. I knew how to absorb a nickname. What I didn't know yet was how to stop absorbing and start building. That lesson was coming, but it hadn't arrived. Not yet. The worst night still had to happen first. The presentation was for a client called Adler Group. They were considering a significant contract with Hartwell, and the pitch had been in preparation for 3 weeks. I had contributed heavily to the research behind it. Market analysis, competitor breakdowns, a section on risk modeling that Victoria had approved without comment, which I took as neutral and should have taken as a warning. On the day of the presentation, Victoria assigned me to handle 2 of the middle sections. I had prepared carefully. I had the slides memorized and the data checked twice. But when I stood up in front of the AITA Group representatives and Hartwell's senior leadership, something happened I had never experienced before. My mind went completely blank. Not for a second or two, but for a long, visible stretch of silence that spread through the room like weather. I looked at the slide. I knew the information was there. I had built it myself. But my body had decided in that moment to stop cooperating. I stumbled. I found my place eventually and finished, but the damage was done. The room had a different feeling by the time I sat down. Victoria did not look at me. She looked at the table. That was worse. After the Adler Group left, Victoria called a debrief. Hartwell leadership were still in the room. I sat at the far end of the table and tried to disappear into my chair. Victoria gave a calm account of what had gone wrong. She used the word professional twice in ways that were clearly not compliments. She spoke about composure under pressure, about being ready when it counted, about certain individuals who performed well in preparation and struggled when the stakes were real. She never used my name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was talking about, and everyone looked somewhere other than at me with a precision that somehow made it worse. On my way out, I passed Petra and Bridget in the corridor. Petra said to Bridget, just audibly enough, that some people simply weren't cut out for this industry. Bridget didn't respond but smiled in a way that was its own full sentence. I walked to my desk, collected my bag, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood over the sink for 3 minutes. Then I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and when the doors opened at the ground floor, I walked out of Hartwell & Associates and did not go back. I called Marcus from the pavement outside. He answered on the second ring like he had been waiting. I told him what happened without the full story, just the shape of it, that I had frozen, that it had been bad, that I had left and wasn't going back. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay. Come home." That was all. No analysis, no advice, no attempt to reframe it before I was ready. Just come home. I took the train, and when I arrived he had made dinner, pasta and salad and bread from the bakery, and we ate without talking much, which was exactly what I needed. Later, sitting on the couch with the television on low, Marcus said something I wrote down on a piece of paper I kept for years. He said, "The worst thing that happened to you today was not that you froze. It's that you were in a room that wanted you to." I didn't fully understand it then. I understood it better at 3 in the morning, and better still over the weeks and months that followed. It was the beginning, I think now, of the long, slow process of seeing myself differently. Of understanding that the room had been wrong before I even walked in. The months after Hartwell were hard in a practical and emotional way simultaneously. I was without a job for nearly 4 months. I applied consistently and was rejected or ignored more often than I care to count. During that time I lived carefully on savings, took on 2 small freelance projects that paid modestly, and tried to rebuild some sense of direction. The industry felt closed off to me. Not because opportunities didn't exist, but because every time I sat down to write a cover letter or prepare for an interview, I could hear Victoria's voice in my ear. Not cut out for this. Not ready for the pressure. I had absorbed the narrative so completely that I had begun to tell it to myself. Marcus noticed. He didn't say much about it directly, but he started forwarding me articles. Not job listings, just articles about people who had been rejected many times before finding their footing. He never attached a message. He just sent them, the way you water something and don't stand around waiting for it to grow. Took time. The self-doubt didn't leave quickly, but it began slowly to share space with something else. Quieter and more stubborn. The kind of thing that doesn't ask for permission. The idea for the company came from a frustration I had lived inside for years. During my time at Hartwell and during the freelance work afterward, I kept encountering the same problem. Small and medium-sized businesses that needed strategic consultancy but couldn't access it because established firms only operated at a scale that excluded them. Big firms wanted big clients. Smaller clients were left to navigate strategy alone. I had spent years doing exactly the analytical work those clients needed. I had just been doing it for a company that kept the credit. What if I built something specifically for them? Not a scaled-down large firm, but a structure designed from the ground up around their needs. I talked it through with Marcus over 3 separate evenings, because Marcus asked the questions that revealed whether an idea had real weight or was just a feeling. By the 3rd evening he looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You've been working on this for a year without realizing it." He was right. The company was called Clear Line Strategy. I registered it on a Wednesday morning in my apartment, with a cup of tea going cold beside my laptop, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Steady. The first 2 years of Clear Line were the kind that don't make for exciting telling but matter enormously when you look back. I took every client I could find, worked hours I would not recommend to anyone, made mistakes and corrected them, and slowly built a reputation for work that was honest, thorough, and designed for the client rather than the firm. I hired my first employee 18 months in. A quiet, precise analyst named Theo who had been overlooked at 2 previous companies and turned out to be extraordinary. By the end of year 2, Clear Line had 14 clients and enough revenue to feel real. By the end of year 3, we had been written about in 2 industry publications. I read both pieces alone in my office after everyone had gone home, sitting with them longer than was probably necessary. Not out of vanity, but because I needed to let the reality settle. This was not borrowed success. No one had handed this to me. I had built it from the same analytical mind that once froze in front of an Adler Group presentation, and the building had changed me in ways I was still understanding. The woman who had stood over a bathroom sink was real, but she was no longer the most recent version. The invitation to the Hartwell Gala arrived by email, routed through a publicist who handled Clear Line's growing media presence. The firm hosted an annual industry gala, a networking event for clients, partners, and notable figures across the consultancy sector. This year, the organizing committee had reached out to invite Clear Line as a featured company and me as keynote speaker. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk that lasted 45 minutes. I thought about the carpet in that office. The bathroom where I stood over the sink for 3 minutes. Victoria's voice. Petra and Bridget in the corridor. I thought about whether going back was something I needed or simply had the right to decide. When I returned, Marcus was at my kitchen table. He had a key and used it freely, which I had never minded. I told him about the email. He read it, looked up, and didn't tell me what to do. He just said, "Whatever you decide, I'll be there." I accepted the invitation the following morning. Not because I needed their recognition. Because I had stopped running from rooms that once made me feel small, and this one was no exception. The gala was held on the first Friday of November. The venue was the same rooftop event space where Hartwell had hosted functions for years. Glass walls on 3 sides, chandelier lighting, a view of the city that cost money to access. I arrived with Marcus at 7. I had chosen my outfit without asking anyone's opinion. A deep navy suit bought 6 months earlier, worn once to a conference where I had been the youngest speaker by 12 years. It was the kind of outfit that did not ask permission. Marcus wore a dark jacket and looked, as he always did at events he was slightly too relaxed for, like someone who had decided to enjoy himself regardless. At the door, the check-in desk had my name on a card marked speaker. I noticed and said nothing. We walked in and the room was exactly as I remembered it because rooms like this do not change. What had changed was everything else. I was not the same person who had collected her bag from that desk 5 years ago. I knew that. I had to keep knowing it in the first minutes of being inside those walls again, while the muscle memory of feeling small tried its best to return. Tried. It did not succeed. The first person I recognized was Petra. She was near the drinks table with white wine and the expression of someone watching a room and waiting for something to happen. She saw me at almost the same moment I saw her. Her expression passed through recognition, then calculation, before settling on a tight, neutral smile. She nodded. I nodded back. No warmth but no theater either. That felt correct. Noelle was across the room near a group I didn't recognize, laughing at something. Bridget was by a pillar speaking to someone I had never met. Felix was near the entrance and looked at me long enough to show he had placed me, then looked away. His version of an apology. Then I saw Victoria. She was near the stage end of the room, speaking to a man in a gray suit, holding herself with the same precise confidence I remembered. She spotted me within a minute. There was a brief but visible pause, and then she said something to the man beside her and smiled. I didn't need to hear it to understand its shape. Some people never change the behavior. They only change the audience. I turned back to the room and let the thought settle without doing anything further with it. I found a seat near the front with Marcus, and we talked quietly while the room filled. A woman from the organizing committee confirmed my timing and handed me a printed program. My name was listed as keynote speaker, with a short bio describing Clearline's growth and market position. I read the bio calmly. Clearline had, in the past year, outperformed several larger firms in client retention metrics the industry tracked closely. 2 of those firms were direct Hartwell competitors. I knew Victoria would have seen those numbers. I had not engineered that. It was what happened when you built something carefully over years and let the work carry its own weight. About 40 minutes in, Victoria approached the stage for opening remarks. Marcus leaned toward me and said, "You okay?" I told him I was. I meant it completely. Whatever Victoria was about to do, I had stopped needing her to do anything differently a long time ago. I had done my own work. I had made my own ground. I just had to sit in my chair and let the evening unfold at the pace it was going to unfold. I had been preparing for this room without knowing it for 5 years. Victoria's opening remarks began the way these things always do. Welcome, gratitude, a summary of the year's highlights. She was practiced and smooth, and the room listened with the attentiveness of people who are networked to the speaker. Then she shifted. Her tone became lighter, the way it does when a speaker is about to tell a story they have told before and enjoyed telling. She said she wanted to share something from some years back, a moment she thought of as a reminder of what this industry demanded. She described a presentation. A young employee. The Adler Group. She named no one. But she described the silence in the room, the stumbling, the way the meeting had been recovered by the rest of the team. She called it a lesson in pressure. Story about fit. Some people, she said, were remarkable in preparation and fell apart in execution, and leadership's job was to identify that early. A few people laughed, the kind of laughs that are really agreements. Some glanced at me. I felt it without looking back. Marcus, beside me, had gone very still. I kept my hands in my lap and my expression unchanged. The story was not new to me. I had been living inside it for 5 years. I sat completely still. Not because I was trying to appear composed, but because I genuinely was. That surprised me. 5 years ago, a moment like that would have sent me to a bathroom to stand over a sink. Now I sat in my chair and felt the room the way you feel weather. I was aware of it, could name its temperature, and it was not my emergency. Victoria stepped down to moderate applause and did not look at me as she returned to her position near the stage. The host came back to the microphone and began the introduction for the keynote speaker. He described a company that had grown significantly in under 5 years. A founder who had turned personal experience into structural advantage. A recent industry report placing Clearline among the top-performing mid-sized consultancies in the region. Marcus reached under the table and squeezed my hand once, quickly, and let go. The host said my name. The room went quiet. Not the uncertain quiet of people connecting dots, but the complete quiet of a room that has just understood something it had not seen coming. I stood slowly, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the stage. I have given speeches before. Not many, and not always comfortably, but enough to know that the first moment at a microphone tells you what kind of night it will be. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the room, and felt nothing like what I had felt at that Adler Group presentation 5 years ago. Felt clear. The specific calm of someone who has arrived somewhere after a long journey and recognizes the place. I began with a statement I had not planned in advance but which arrived with certainty. I said, "I know this room." There was a pause. Then I said, "I worked in this company for 10 months 5 years ago. I left one evening after a presentation and I did not come back." Another pause. I was watching the room and the room was watching me. Victoria had gone very still. Petra had turned from a conversation she was having. The laughter that had followed Victoria's story a few minutes ago had no air left in it. Continued. I said, "That night was the beginning of the hardest years of my professional life and also, without question, the most important. So I want to tell you what happened after I walked out of that door." I told them about the 4 months without work. The freelance projects that barely covered expenses. The cover letters I wrote and the silence that answered them. I told them about building clear line from a frustration and a kitchen table conversation with my brother. The first client, who came through a referral from someone who believed in the quality of the work. The 18 months of doing everything myself before I could bring in Theo. The industry publications I had read alone in my office, feeling something I could only describe as quietly astonished. I did not name Victoria. I did not name Hartwell by any description that required naming. I did not perform bitterness and I did not perform forgiveness. Both would have been performances. What I said was this: that the environment I had been pushed out of had, in the most unintentional way possible, done me a significant service. It had made it clear, beyond any doubt, that I needed to build something of my own. That I would never thrive in a room where I had to make myself smaller to fit. That the fit had been wrong, not me. I said that last sentence slowly. I wanted everyone in the room to hear it. I watched them receive it. The room was completely quiet while I spoke. Not the polite quiet of people being patient, but the focused quiet of people listening in a way that uses the whole body. I had been in enough rooms to feel the difference. I spoke for about 18 minutes. Near the end, I said something I had not planned, which came from a place I was still in the process of understanding. I said that the people who had doubted me had not been obstacles. They had been evidence. Evidence that some rooms were not built for certain kinds of people. And the answer was not to try harder to fit, but to build rooms that were. I looked out at the audience, aware without making a show of it that Victoria was in my eye line. I did not look at her directly. I looked at the room the way you look when you have something genuine to say and are saying it to everyone at once. I said, "I am not here tonight because I proved anyone wrong. I am here because I finally proved something right to myself." Pause. Then. That took longer than it should have. But it was worth every single year. I stepped back and let the silence hold for 1 full second. The applause that followed was not the automatic kind. It started a beat later than applause usually does, which meant it was real. It came fully from the room, not from obligation or politeness, but from recognition of something said honestly in a space not always accustomed to honesty. I stood at the podium for a moment and let it land. Then I nodded, stepped back and walked off the stage. Marcus was on his feet when I reached him. He didn't say anything. He put both arms around me and held on, which was more than enough. When I stepped back, I could see the room clearly for the first time since walking in. Victoria was near the stage edge. Her expression was something I could not fully name. Not guilt, not anger, something more like exposure. The kind of look people have when a version of themselves they prefer not to examine has been brought into a lit room. Petra and Bridget were near each other, both quiet. Noel was looking at his phone with the intensity of someone who needs somewhere to put his eyes. I felt nothing toward any of them requiring a word or gesture. That itself was its own kind of answer. I did not stay for the rest of the gala. I had said what I came to say, and the evening had shifted something that could not be unshifted. There was no reason to stay and watch it settle. I collected my jacket and Marcus fell into step beside me without being asked. On the way out, a woman touched my elbow and said my speech had meant something to her personally. I thanked her and meant it. A man from the organizing committee shook my hand and said Clear Line was exactly the kind of story the industry needed more of. Thanked him too. At the door, I looked back once at the room. The chandeliers, the glass walls, the city beyond. The same room where I had once been invisible. Then I turned and walked out into the cool November air. Marcus came to stand beside me on the pavement. He said, "Dinner?" Said yes. We went to a small Italian place 2 blocks away that neither of us had been to before and split a bottle of sparkling water and talked about everything except the gala. About Marcus's ideas. About the week ahead. About nothing important at all. It was exactly the right way to end it. The clip appeared online within hours. Someone had recorded a portion of the speech. Not the whole thing, just from "I know this room" through to the final lines about proving something right to herself. About 4 minutes long. By the next morning it had spread widely enough that my publicist called before 9 to ask how I wanted to handle the attention. I told her I didn't want to handle it. I wanted to let it exist and go back to work. She suggested a short statement. I wrote 3 sentences and approved them by 10. The comments on the clip were the kind that stay with you not because of their praise but because of their specificity. People describing their own versions of the same story, the same rooms, the same quiet dismissals. One woman wrote that she had frozen during a presentation 7 years ago and had never gone back to that industry, and that watching the clip made her think for the first time about returning. I read that comment 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Marcus with no message, the same way he used to forward me articles during the hard months. He replied in under a minute with a single word. See. In the months that followed, Clearline continued to grow. We brought on 3 new clients in the first quarter of the following year, 2 referred by attendees from the Hartwell event. Theo hired 2 more analysts. We moved into a larger office space. Still modest, but with a meeting room with a glass wall I had chosen specifically because it reminded me of nothing and belonged entirely to us. The industry press wrote about Clearline twice more. I gave 2 interviews, approaching both with the same clarity I had found on that November stage. I said what was true, left out what wasn't necessary, and let the work speak alongside the words. Victoria, I heard through the informal network that connects people in any industry, had left Hartwell by the following spring. The circumstances were described vaguely, which usually means they were significant. I didn't ask for details. Her story was hers to carry. What I knew was that the version of myself she had helped shape, by pushing me out, by being the obstacle she was the version I was most grateful for. Not because of her. In spite of her. That distinction mattered more than it might have seemed. Marcus came to the Clearline office one afternoon about 6 months after the gala, ostensibly to bring me lunch, actually to tell me he had been accepted into a graduate program in behavioral economics at a university 3 hours away. He was going. He had saved for 2 years without telling me. I sat across from him with a glass wall behind me and the city beyond and felt a pride so large I had no words for it and didn't try to find any. I just said, "When do you start?" He said September. Said good. He looked around my office, the framed first Clearline business registration, the photo of our team at the end of our first full year, the 2 industry publications in a simple frame, and said, "I knew it would look like this." I asked what he meant. He said, "Like you." We ate the lunch he had brought and talked for an hour about his program, his plans, the city he was moving to. When he left I stood at my office window for a while. The same city that had once felt like a place I didn't quite fit inside. It looked different from where I was standing. Had looked different for a while. I thought about Victoria once more, about 3 months after Marcus left. Not with bitterness and not with satisfaction. Both required her to still matter in a way she no longer did. I thought about her because I was preparing a talk for early career women in the industry and trying to articulate something I had been carrying for years. I sat at my desk and wrote this. The people who mock you, dismiss you, or make you feel small are not telling you who you are. They are telling you where they are. They are standing in a place too small for your real size and reporting the dimensions from there. The humiliation of that presentation night was not evidence of my limits. It was evidence of a room that had already decided what I was before I opened my mouth. I had spent years trying to change their minds. What I eventually did instead was build something large enough that they had to reconsider without my asking them to. I read that back to myself. Then I added one line at the end. It said, "The glow-up was never for them. It was always entirely mine." I saved the document, closed my laptop, and walked to the window. The city was still out there. So was I.